This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us tonight one of Macon's leading intellects and general all-around savant, the Dr. Buck Melton. Welcome, Buck.
Glad to be back, but I somewhat have to disagree with your characterization, but thank you for
Well, that could be those accolades might be a disadvantage in any future political direction your career may take.
I don't
we
know.
normally discuss the fact the country is so much the worse for wear, not having your hat in the ring. Any possibilities? Things are 2020 is approaching the next electoral cycle?
Not at all, not at all.
No.
And it's not false modesty on my part either. It's more like, I think it was Attlee that Churchill said, he's a modest man with much to be modest about. So.
Well, that's pretty clever, isn't it? Well, tonight we talked about a lot of things. One of the problems it seems the country is facing, at least the way I see it, is there enormous number of immigrants in the country, a tremendous population of people that are undocumented, lots of tension in regards to that, porous borders, what to do about it. The President Trump is pushing his immigration policy as the linchpin, as far as one can say, of his presidential aspirations for re-election. So a question comes up tonight, possibly discussing citizenship, what it means to be a U.S. citizen, what are the obligations, the social contract that exists to being a U.S. citizen, what kind of problems we're having now, have we ever faced them before? And I'll just toss you the softball in regards to that. What does the Constitution say about U.S. citizenship, becoming a citizen?
Very little, actually, especially if we talk about the original Constitution only. It said practically nothing about citizenship. The only thing that occurs to me immediately is the Article 2 provision that says a president must be, quote unquote, a natural-born citizen. And of course, with the allegations 8 to 12 years ago that Obama had not been born in Hawaii, the birther allegations, the claim that he was not a citizen by birth, raised the issue of natural-born citizen for the first time. And then in 2016, when Ted Cruz was running for president on the Republican ticket, without question, he was not born in the United States. He was born in Canada to American citizen parents. And the question came up again, what is a natural-born citizen? And with the highly, what shall I say, transitory societies that we have today, the open borders, the mobile populations, this is going to become, in and of itself, a bigger and bigger issue as we go along in the future. The 14th Amendment, which was, of course, added long after the original Constitution, 1868, and was written really in contemplation of the freed slaves, African Americans, said, if you are born in the United States, you are a citizen. But it still doesn't talk a lot about what is a citizen and what isn't. Some of the rights that same 14th Amendment mentioned talked not about the rights of citizens, but about the rights of persons, which would include non-citizens as well. So the question of exactly what citizenship confers has always been a little bit up in the air.
Well, just to talk about it, one of the things that goes with citizenship is getting a passport,
Yes.
There's certain rights and privileges that come with it. And if we examined the I guess, world history in regards to citizenship, if people live in a certain fixed area, then it's sort of automatic that they are inhabitants of a particular place, I guess you'd say. And for a long time, there were no particular rights that went with being an inhabitant of a particular place. So back in the days of monarchs and aristocrats, Let's see, what exactly, what were the rights of a citizen in 1300 in London? What were the rights of a citizen? Maybe, I guess what I would submit is that only gradually have rights been put into the notion of citizenship. Mm-hmm. And for a long time, it really didn't make any difference. You were an inhabitant of a particular place, well, so what? You're a citizen of a particular place, well, so what? Unless citizenship gives you certain rights. And apparently, there have always been obligations for inhabitants. So the king could just basically say, well, you're an inhabitant, we're going to force you to do something. You have to obey the king's laws. You have to, if I want you to defend the city, I'll dragoon you into doing it. And mostly just stay out of my way, and you can live here. And then over the years, that notion has increased a lot. So it's, I guess, in our more contemporary world, being a citizen turns out to be a much bigger deal,
Yes. I think traditionally citizenship was a higher level status. And for instance, the first notion that I remember of citizenship, I'm sure there were big issues regarding it before this, but comes straight out of the New Testament. Paul, or Saul of Tarsus, if you wish, was clearly an inhabitant of the Roman Empire, and he was constantly getting in and out of hot water, and you find this in the final chapters of the book of Acts. And finally, they're, I think, getting ready to kill him, and he says, well, you can't do that to me, I'm a citizen. And he says, a Roman citizen, well, there's any other kind. And it's the magic words, everybody, whoa, and they had to send him to Rome for disposition by the Roman authorities themselves. In the United States, for instance, prior to the Civil War, prior to the 14th Amendment, there were free blacks. There were 4 million African Americans in the American South, and a few 100,000 of them were free blacks. They were not slaves. That did not mean they had any right at all under state or federal law to the same treatment as a white person. And so this is one of the reasons for the 14th Amendment. But even the 14th Amendment, even at that point, said, okay, if you're born here, you're a citizen, and you've got the rights of citizens, but it didn't really describe what those rights were. And then farther down in the same amendment, in the same section of the amendment, it addressed that inequality problem, but it didn't do it in terms of citizens. It said, no state shall pass any law denying to all persons the equal protection of the laws. So even there, it did not link citizenship with a special treatment or with the common denominator treatment.
Well, maybe we can parse that out a little bit about the difference between being an inhabitant, mm-hmm. or, quote, a person, and a citizen. Yes. So it would appear to me, let's say you gave the example of Paul, that in the Roman Empire, it was a big deal for several centuries to be a citizen, and even more to be the senatorial class, or you could be associated with the Roman Empire, the Roman state, the Roman Republic, and you got something which was prestige. You also could be in the army, and you could loot, and you could there are all sorts of privileges that came your way, including later food and circuses, bread and circuses. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that happened was that gradually the citizenship was extended to all the inhabitants of the empire. I think that happened in about 212 AD. And for that reason, there really wasn't, I would say that maybe it became debased a bit.
Yes.
So, it became not much difference between a citizen and an inhabitant. Yes. Because there was no difference. The treatment would all be the same. The rights and obligations were the same. And in general, a class of really patriotic Romans that considered their identity attached to the Roman Empire, and they were getting something for their citizenship, the prestige, power. That became less and less. It didn't mean anything. So when the Visigoths appeared, the idea of dying for the state had less appeal. I could maybe say that.
There was less of a sense of personal investment.
Yes, and so what I'm sort of getting into, making this point in a laborious way, I think, is that for a long while after the Roman Empire, citizenship was sort of a nebulous thing. There may have been some rights attached to it, some not. Probably the biggest right, I think, would be the right to vote, and then influence the direction of society, and the power of if you could vote, you could put people presumably in Parliament or in a position of power, and they could grant favors. They could do something with taxes. There could be some advantages, and for a long while, people might be shall we say, a subject. Maybe we can take our discussion in that direction, and look at what it means to be an inhabitant, a citizen, and a subject.
Yes.
So the subject would mean you were just under the thrall of the monarch, and there were certain kind of responsibilities the monarch had in your direction. If you were the subject, presumably the monarch could do anything they wished, but if one of her subjects was impinged upon by some contrary force, then presumably the monarch would take offense and trying to protect her subject the same way that she would protect her property. Mm-hmm. So in a way, I'm sort of, as I sail the ship in this direction, inhabitants, subjects, being property, what rights do they really have? What difference did it make in general to have the nomenclature of being a citizen? Mm-hmm. And then what I might suggest is that the revolutions in the latter part of the 18th century, citizenship meant something more. And I think in revolutionary France, they would call each other citizen,
yes.
Citizen so-and-so. And being a citizen gave one a certain control over the policy of the country, at least in revolutionary France, although that didn't really count for much, finally.
Yes. Well, I would say it's rights as well as responsibilities, and we have a lot to unpack here. I'm not sure that citizenship was a real notion during the Middle Ages.
Subjects were, maybe.
Subjects, certainly. The feudal arrangement was much more almost a contractual system.
Yes.
And so you had the nobles and then you had everyone else. I would not say that the right to vote was the defining aspect of citizenship until really Jacksonian America, which, or perhaps even later. I would say that citizenship was a combination of elevated rights and elevated duties. And speaking of the French Revolution, I would think the big leap forward there of defining citizenship in that regard was probably the levée en masse, which was what, 1793.
They fought all the enemies coming at them.
Yes, which you're a citizen, you now share in the equality and the fraternité, but in exchange, you must put your life at the service of the state, of the French Republic.
Or the quasi-religion.
Yes.
In a way, the state became a religion. The revolutionary ideals, in some ways,
I'd say no quasi about it.
Well,
myself,
the idea was the religion of the states meant the same way that I guess you were one of God's children, so to speak.
Yes.
You have a relationship with God, and in the state, a similar kind of system was put in place with what I'm finally selling the ship into is the rights and obligations that have sort of evolved over the years, and for a long while, citizenship was sort of a nebulous kind of thing. It didn't, it was there kind of, maybe it was rolling along a little bit, and if you looked at the United States, people that were inhabitants, quote, citizens, many, they were free, but they did not have the right to vote because of their property. They didn't match the property qualifications. Additionally, only males could do this. And the assumption being that the males had an obligation to be in the militia to defend the country. So there was sort of a relationship between the rights and privileges of citizenship. Mm-hmm. And so the ladies, to use the word, they were citizens, but citizens without substantial rights. And in many places, the right to vote and also own property. And different legal encumbrances face them in many ways. And so the relationship between the state and and citizens in America was in many ways predicated upon the idea, the notion of being in the militia.
Yes.
And that's sort of the way things went, some privileges and obligations. And many people did not have those obligations, so you would not routinely be expected to do things. Maybe another obligation would be to pay taxes. But everyone paid taxes, did they not? Whether you were a citizen.
Some sort or another, yes.
So, but the only people that really had the right to, quote, vote would be citizens,
Yes.
male citizens.
Yes. Well, I don't suppose it was analyzed in that regard, that there are not that many cases defining what citizenship is, at least prior to the 1860s or thereabout. And while you had, certainly, if you were a male citizen, by the way, did you know that you were a member of the Georgia militia?
I've heard that.
Yes, you're a member of the unorganized Georgia militia. I do not believe that women are. But,
really? Is that fair?
it is what it is. And so this is different from the organized Georgia militia, which is, of course, the Georgia National Guard.
Yes.
But so that vestige is still there. There is no such thing as a United States militia, and there never was. But there was not a lot of concern about what was a United States citizen
Yes.
until the late 19th century. And of course, this is at the same time that the Married Women's Property Acts are coming in, and women are starting to get more of the rights traditionally afforded men. This is when the 14th Amendment is drafted and written, and you suddenly see the addition of the citizenship clause in the 14th Amendment. So it evolves in a very uneven way throughout the 19th century. And a lot of that is due to the influence of the French Revolution and Jacksonian America.
Well, we're, as you use your phrase, unpacking a complicated subject, I think. And the idea is it's connected with a social contract. You're born wherever you're born. And you've never signed the social contract, but you're required to observe it. Mm-hmm. You didn't, when you turn 18, sign the social contract. I'm a citizen, not a citizen. I accept these responsibilities. I don't accept these responsibilities. And indeed, I am not a citizen, and I have thus less of a position in society. In many countries, citizenship is very restrictive. I think particularly in the Persian Gulf area, many places, that only a relatively few people are citizens and get the benefit of that position, and many people can never obtain citizenship. And I guess the question is sort of where I'm sailing the ship a little bit is that for a long while, it didn't make that so much difference to be a citizen or not to be a citizen. There are different places and times that it did, and other times that it didn't, and there was a lot of blurring between an inhabitant, a subject, and a citizen. And the only recently, I would say, is the rights of citizenship have been enormously expanded. And with that expansion, people have coveted the title more than in the past. And one of the things that's, getting back to the start of our conversation, that's confusing in contemporary America are the number of people that covet American citizenship, because unlike other places, being an American citizen gives you the same, in many ways, the same rights that Paul had, possibly more. The protection of the state gives you great, extraordinary things. You can vote, and presumably you can be your votes can be courted by politicians, and politicians will reward your support at the ballot box with all kinds of financial benefits. Mm-hmm. So all kinds of things are happening to be a citizen. All kinds of advantages are in the plate, and at the same time, relatively few obligations. Yes. Can we name some obligations of citizenship? And we can name
Well,
many things in a contemporary America.
Well, I could name a couple, but before that, I'm going to call you on that a little bit.
Oh.
That other than the right to vote, what other benefit is due, before we get to the obligations, what other benefit do you get solely because you're a citizen? I'm going to argue not a whole lot, because the biggies are due to persons.
Well, you could say you get access to education.
So do illegal immigrants. They are persons.
You go to state universities and be an in-state tuition. I mean, some of the issues here.
Okay, although that is not due to United States citizenship. That's due to state citizenship.
Which I would submit are often in the same category, because I don't think you could be a state citizen and not be a citizen of the U.S. I mean, I could be wrong on that.
I think you're correct about that.
Right. So in actually they're the same, I would submit, and so you get the benefits of Social Security. You get the benefits without any encumbrances of a driver's license. You get a passport. You can move around, and just to get into the most, where all the rights flow from are the right to vote, because the politicians cater to those people that basically are voters. So if you have a particular thing you like, you can influence the politicians to give that to you. Maybe it's a new freeway, or maybe some kind of national park that you'd like, or you'd like your child to go to West Point, or you'd like to get some kind of encumbrance with, I don't know, you tripped at the mall and you want access to the courts. I know I have to be careful a little bit. I'm careful a little bit. I push it a little bit. Well, I would say there. And I, having blundered into this, you could also say anyone that's an inhabitant of the place gets some protections, but not the fulsome amount that a citizen would get.
I'm not convinced. You made a better case than I was expecting.
Yes.
But and this may be where you're going. This may be one of the traps you're laying for me. But there is the movement on now to grant the right to vote to illegal immigrants. So in that case, even that aspect of citizenship is going to be watered. A few people have floated that. I'm not sure if it would work.
Well, what I'm going to get into is some more kind of things there. So citizenship has these, I guess you could say, defined benefits, like a defined benefit program. It also has psychological benefits. So you think of yourself, you say USA without any problems at the the soccer match, and you consider yourself an American citizen. We're the best. You feel that way. So there's a lot of just psychological advantages to living here, being a citizen. You can sing "God Bless America" easily, and there's a sense of camaraderie with your other citizens that. And also the same, some of the things around citizenship would be a certain understanding of societal values. You can move around pretty easily, understanding what's up and what's down, and also in general, people that were citizens would be able to speak English, to communicate, travel, do this and that. Now, what you've raised, and we're sort of going into one other point I'd like to make before we sail into the present situation, is the obligations for citizenship are really quite little.
Yes,
there's very little obligation. There's very little deals with. So what? You're a citizen. What do you have to?
The only one that occurs to me immediately, and I'm thinking that it would apply to all citizens, both naturalized and born here in the U.S., would be potentially, and I'm sure there are others if we stopped and thought about it, but the one that occurs to me immediately is that you are potentially subject to conscription, which of course we haven't had for 40 plus years now.
Yes.
So,
well, I think that would be that's the big deal. And so also the other point about it is the idea going back to the last century was that a citizen was a male who the quid pro quo for these rights were he would die and sacrifice himself for his country, and since the ladies, to use that phrase, would not routinely have that obligation. Their deal would be a better one from that point of view. There would be a better one, and also, just to continue, the access to the courts in correcting social wrongs would be an easier path for an American citizen as opposed to someone from somewhere else. So, but what I want to go to is all of these advantages have been placed in citizenship, all these good things. And there's relatively little out there that any obligations. And I can think of the military, that's one. Secondly, you could say this is an obligation in some ways, is at least to answer the call for jury duty, though I don't think they call you unless you've registered to vote. I think that. So you could just be a citizen, not registered to vote, and then have no jury obligations. But finally, we get into the biggest obligation of all, which is to pay taxes. So just coming down to it, being a citizen with all these advantages, you just have to contribute money to the state.
Yes.
And then that would depend on what that deal for you is personally. I mean, you get to live here, you get to do this, you get to do that. But many citizens sort of, in a way, lose on the deal. They pay a lot of taxes, and they get some benefits, but it's sort of expensive to be a citizen.
Well, once
you
again,
you live particularly in New York City, and you make a lot of money there.
Well, I'll call you on that too. I think it's impossible even for an illegal alien, for anybody to live in America and dodge every tax there is. You have taxes coming at you from every which way. If you can own property, and if you're a person, you can own property, you've got to pay those property taxes, which are quite hefty.
I think it's a little. I'll joust with you on the subject, but I think the citizens of another country they can escape with their property. They can their inheritance. Their inheritance is not taxed by the feds, and if you try and renounce your citizenship, then the federal government takes your property, because there is that's one of the obligations of being a citizen, is you have to expose your property to the will of the state, if you could say that. And if you're not a citizen, you have, although it's true enough, you may have to pay taxes while you're here, but it's just less less onerous if you're.
I think you just need to be more moderate your position a little bit. I see what you're getting at and agree with it. Instead of seeing it as a package deal, we divide it up. So if I am an alien, either legal or otherwise, green card holder, I can own property, and and I'm speaking real property, and if I own that property, I have to pay taxes on it, and if I pay those taxes on it, I am quote unquote entitled to the police and fire protection that I've purchased. So. Perhaps federal income taxes, you're buying other aspects of citizenship or what have you. But before I let you get back to that and give me a rejoinder, I do think it's important to point out that regarding conscription, the draft, that there have been many places throughout history where you could purchase citizenship by volunteering yourself for the military. So which works very nicely with your theory.
And indeed, you can buy passports in other countries. So,
you've done this? So.
Well, no. I mean, that's a perfect Christmas present, which I'll get into. I mean, you can. People will sell you passports, as well as other common thing is you can buy your way into the countries just by just purchasing property.
Yes.
Well, it's a little bit of a confused story here, which I think it's been a useful interchange. I don't know if we're going to be able to get to our major point here. Or not.
Well, there's always another episode.
All right, we're going to have another episode to discuss this. And the point I think I'm going to try and make is that for some people, it's a really great deal to obtain American citizenship with very little downside. And the fact that is a situation means that in some ways the national identity is being impacted by these circumstances, and that a reasonable person would want to define things a bit better and understand things a bit better than the kind of debate that we have now.
Yes.
So we'll talk some more about this.
We should.
Very
Indeed.
Interesting, and thank you once again.
Thank you, sir.
And I would encourage you to remember your political possibilities. Just continue that.
I'm going to try very hard to forget them.
Yes, okay, thank you. Thanks.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.